Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Hackley. I'm the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation here at Harvard Law School, and it's such a pleasure to have you here for this very interesting event. And it's so great to have so many of our mediation friends here, including our beloved Gabrielle Dortmund, who brought these speakers here. He is a mediator extraordinaire and artist and interesting person. So thank you, Gabby, and a good friend. I know the Harvard Law School calendar said 11:45. This is the official start time, 12. We're going to try to get them to do a better job of putting the time up. But thank you all for coming. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Ljubjana Wüstehube, co-founder of Inmedio Berlin, the Institute for Mediation Consulting and Development. She's a consultant and mediation trainer with more than 20 years of experience. She's worked as a Russian language interpreter, run youth exchange programs between Germany and Russia and elsewhere. In 1998, she co-founded Inmedio, the consultancy based in Berlin and Frankfurt, which provides mediation and organizational development services. She co-directs 200-hour mediation courses in cooperation with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the University of Applied Sciences in Arts, Northwestern Switzerland. She's a certified mediation trainer. Dirk Splinter, the co-director of Inmedio Berlin, is also a senior mediator and trainer with more than 15 years of experience. He runs mediation processes for individuals, groups, and organizations in German-speaking countries and in post-conflict and transition countries in Africa, Asia, and Southeast Europe. He also designs and implements conflict management systems for organizations such as hospitals, public administrations, and large and medium-sized businesses, as well as community mediation programs. We're eager to hear from you and to interact in this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I have to sit on that guy.
You have to sit on, yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for that nice introduction. We are very honored and very happy to be here, and we are very honored that so many people came today to listen to us. And first of all, of course, I want to thank Polly Hamlin. Where is she? Thank you for our invitation and the program on negotiation. And I have to thank, I know you don't like that, but Gabi Grobman as well, because we are doing, today in the morning we talked about it, we are doing a kind of a circle here. In 1996, we had a mediation training with Gabi Grobman. She came to Berlin, and she was one of the few people coming from America to present the Harvard program. And in Germany, this book, Getting to Yes, in Germany, it's calling the Harvard program.
Harvard concept.
The Harvard concept.
Yeah.
So it sounds very good. So we are very happy to have Gabi as a trainer at that in these times. And now we are coming back, and I think you were the one who showed us the spirit of mediation, so that after that we try to just work with that concept, work with mediation, spread mediation around the world, and to try to combine different approaches of mediation to different cultures and different environments.
So in Europe, my name is Dirk, by the way, as was mentioned before. We are running our small institute together, providing mediation services in Germany and 1-year training courses, but in projects to support local mediators in post-war situations in different countries as well. And we'll highlight some in the next 25 minutes. I hope we will manage to be finished with the presentation itself, so we should have lots of time for questions and answers. As you all know, in Europe, or particularly in Germany, since 1 year, everybody is talking constantly about the so-called refugee crisis. We don't like too much the notion of crisis here. because it gives a negative connotation to the refugees themselves, but we don't have a better term though. So talking about this, about the potential of mediation in that context, we have to keep in mind that we have different actors and we have different conflicts, so different ways of trying to make use of mediation in order not to solve or to address the root causes of the refugee crisis, but to mitigate it at least. We'll highlight.
Am I in the way? How can I get out of the way here?
You can just move to the left.
Oh, like that?
Yeah, sure.
Better? Yes. Better.
So, we had the privilege to be involved in different projects in different countries where mediation was to be applied or used in refugee camps or in the context of refugee conflicts where refugees were involved. And we are going to start one in Germany as well and make use of the experience that we made in different countries. Let me start with Kenya. This is the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, which hosts some 300,000 refugees, most of them since more than 25 years. They came from Somalia at the beginning of the 90s. But then there was another wave coming 2-3 years before from South Sudan, when the South-South conflict erupted or escalated. I think it was 2012 or 13. I had the opportunity to be there in January, and it gives us an idea of the different types of conflict that we face. So this is just one of the buildings. We have this type of buildings, and we have very new buildings here. And this is a settlement of the host communities, of the surrounding communities. So as you can maybe guess from the picture, one of the biggest problems they have is conflicts between the refugees and the host communities who feel neglected. And they have a point there. It would happen that since after UNHCR has cut the supplies for firewood in the camp, they just don't have enough firewood to cook. I don't know. They get it every 3 months, but it's only enough for 1 month. So what happens is that women go outside the camp to collect firewood. They get attacked by people from the host communities, they get raped, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, host communities, the core conflict maybe is not between the host communities and the refugees, but between the host communities and the international agencies. And they don't make a differentiation here between UNHCR, who are running the camp, and international INGOs or agencies like USAID, JICA, or the German development. In Turkey, to highlight another example, where southern Turkey, where now I think more than 2 million refugees from Syria live, they have sort of two types of refugees. They have those refugee camps, and we all know this sort of pictures where the refugees are provided with food and so on and so forth. But also they have, sorry for the bad quality of the picture, they have refugees who just stay there in the southern part of Turkey as guests. Officially they are guests. They don't have a legal status as refugees. They just live there, they're rented apartments. Some of them run some businesses. So what happens is it has an effect on the communities, obviously. The rents are increasing. There are some people from the host communities who benefit from that. There are others who don't benefit from that. So we have different types of conflicts here. We have a conflict as well between those who benefit from the presence of the refugees and those who don't. And mediation and conflict resolution should very much try to focus on how could they share the benefit, so to speak. So one of the attempts that we made here was to involve those guys, the muhtars. They are the traditional community leaders, because it was obvious that just working with the refugees doesn't make sense here. Also, we try to involve like different NGO workers. Some of them were focusing on working with refugees in the camps. Some of them were focused on working with those refugees who lived as guests. One of the technical problems here was that the Syrians speak Arabic and the Turks speak Turkish, and there were only very, very few who would speak English or speak each other's language. So our colleagues who went there and did the mediation trainings, they had to be interpreted in 2 languages. So you can see the 2 interpreters in the booth at the rear part of the room, which was somewhat, I would try to avoid it if possible. But it was really, also it's a problem sometimes then of the funding for this type of projects. They tell you, at least the German Foreign Office does, unfortunately, you can start in October and you'll be finished by December. So if you really want to try to identify the 3-4 persons who are knowledgeable in both languages, it's too late already to implement the project. What the German Development Service, the so-called GIZ,
Sorry for that.
in Kenya, coming back to the Kenya example now, is to focus on those conflicts between the host communities and the refugees, trying to provide assistance to both of them. And one part of that project was to implement mediation for youth, but also for elders. And we had other groups of people who we could start with and build on existing structures. For example, here, I like that one because it says Youth Embracing Dialogue for Peaceful Coexistence. So they had youth groups that represented the different ethnic groups that lived in the camp, who had already informally tried to bridge the gaps between the communities. We had these people here, very impressive people who were served as social counselors. And they somewhat were like, people were approaching them with whatever sorts of problems they had and were the conflict. They were thinking about, could they refer it to the elders, who traditionally in most African countries would serve as mediators / arbitrators, or are there other means to solve it? So here what GIZ will try to do is to build on those existing structures and use them in order to implement mediation as a means to solve the existing conflicts. Even more important than the conflicts between the refugees and the host communities, in this case of the Kenyan refugee camp and in others, is the problem that, for example, from the South Sudanese conflict, we have both representatives of both groups living there in the camp. And you can imagine that whatever problem occurs, if people from both groups are involved, be it, I don't know, a little quarrel when they queue up at the water tap. Whatever problem evolves, it becomes an ethnic conflict. So we have to focus on that. And we faced a similar situation when we started to implement a project. It's very long ago, but we can build on that in the late 1990s, right, Ljubjana?
Yes.
In Switzerland, where people like these were living from the war in the Balkans.
Yeah, and it's, of course, that's long ago, and we were kind of, which one? I don't have my glasses, okay.
Yeah.
So, we want to give you a small insight in how we do these kinds of programs. It's an old one, but starting with January next year, we will have a program, a 1-year certificate course for social workers and people who are leaders in refugee homes or refugee centers, to just teach them to work with this kind of approach. So the first, of course, we improved it, hopefully, a bit, but this approach is a combination of mediation in a classical sense of mediation, trauma work on one side, trauma work, and mediation and something which we would call like helping to empower and helping to raise the self-esteem. So these are people from Yugoslavia, from very different countries, and at that time they were in Switzerland in a refugee center, and the situation was that they lived in a very, very small space, so they had to share a middle-sized room with 3 families. And the explosive thing was that these people were from very different ethnic groups and different religions, and at home the war was going on. So it was a very tense situation, and we offered trainings, and you see we have the same situation like you showed, Dirk, before, 2 translators. This time not with a cabin, and we prefer to work with 2 translators, one in the Bosnian language, one in Serbian language, but not simultaneously, but consecutively, so that, and the motto was, everybody should understand everybody. So that was crucial for the people. Maybe you know that the Serbian language and the Bosnian language are not very different. So, in fact, actually, they understand each other's. But as a symbol or a sign of acknowledgement, we translated, or these people translated each and every word until everybody was fine to hear the words in their own languages. So that was one contribution from our side to acknowledgement to this tense situation. We worked on our main method was storytelling and dialogue. So here you see somebody drawing a picture, and very often we asked the people in this mixed group. So all the ethnic groups, all the representatives of them were in one room, to draw pictures of different issues, and then to tell the story. So why draw pictures? It's of course not because of we want to do an art thing, but it is because then people can better focus on their story, and only they have the right to tell their story. Nobody has the right to question that story. But you can tell the story, and you know that maybe from other dialogue groups as well now. And after every story, you will have sharing rounds, so people share emotions. What are your emotions hearing that story? But they don't question the story. So we had different sequences. This is something, it's an exercise on self-esteem. So we asked people to draw a silhouette of their whole body, and then to find the source of energy inside themselves. And you can see that this guy, he has even no hands, so and no head. And the crucial thing was, yes, it's missing, and he didn't, he didn't feel it. So the crucial thing was to find energy inside, because many refugees coming to the refugee centers feeling very, very lost. They have no access to their own resources. So that is the first step, to find own resources. And you can see at the end of the training, there was several parts of the training, and there were in total, I think, 16 days, but with breaks. This is the same man. Now you see that he has a head, he has some hands, and a bit more energy. Of course, that's not finished, but you see maybe in this picture, and he could see his success. So growing up energy, finding more own reserves, finding them, and having more energy. Another part of the training, here you see them showing each other's their sources of energy and to inspiring each other's, commenting on it. Another part of that training was to focus on what happened. So incidents from the war, and that was a crucial moment because imagine there were different people there, and lots of them were ex-combatants from different sides. So they fought, and the fight was going on at home. So they told their stories, and they shared. And this is the I think this is maybe the heart of the approach. They shared emotions, and they could find out that the emotions and the suffering for different people, even from different sides, is the same. So we could come. Then this is another picture of what happened. So the incidents from the war. You see, they have very different ways to express it, but crucial that they can express something. Here you see this sharing around. Weather was good. It was at summertime, and everybody is showing here his picture, and then we are talking about one picture and then one story, and if this story is finished, and the sharing round, and then we'll have the next picture. When at the same time we worked on mediation skills, basic mediation skills like active listening, how to summarize, how to understand people, all that stuff. So, and on trust building. So here you can see that the group is already starts to be a team. So I don't know whether you know it's a challenge for people who are enemies or who don't like each other to work on one sheet of paper at the same time. It can be very, very explosive. So they worked on that, and at the same time we founded mediation teams. And of course these teams sustained from different ethnic groups, religious groups, maybe a mixture of old and young. So we have our mothers, and there were some mothers, and that was very helpful as well, and ex-combatants, so that the conflicts which were in the refugee center between different representatives of the different, so as Dirk said, every conflict, even in about who is first in the queue for food, every conflict starts to be an ethnic conflict, of course, in these heated situations. So they founded mediation teams, and they did peer mediation, of course, amongst adults, so peer mediation, so mediation offered from them to other people who were who lived in that refugee homes. Okay, so I wanted to tell this one story of that lady. Trust building. About trust building, and maybe one very essential and difficult part of this program is that the approach is very process oriented. So, of course, we give some theoretic insights, some inputs about skills, but because they are working in mixed groups, everybody tries every moment, every day on conflicts which are coming up in the group when we are working. They try to solve it. So in the beginning, I try to help them to solve them, and then they copy it, they model it, and then they try to solve them. And I would like to tell you one situation. This lady here, Slavica, she announced that tomorrow would be her birthday and that she will not come tomorrow and maybe not the next days, because she already knew that she would fall in deep depression. Asking about why, of course she told the story. She didn't told that before, that all her family was killed by Serbs. So people started to talk active, so they already knew some techniques, active listening. They started to think together with Slavica about options, how to, maybe there would be other options than to fall in deep depression. So they talked about it, and they just changed perspectives. And I think a very important point for Slavica was when the Serb representatives, there were 2 or 3 in the group, they said, okay, you know what, we will not come tomorrow, so that you can come. And that was kind of turning point, you see, this kind of changing perspective. And then Slavica was able to say, no, please come. And then we talked about, you know, very, very step by step how to do that birthday, so that for her family would be some flowers here, so that they could, and no congratulations. She said, no, nobody can, please don't say happy birthday. So we planned that birthday together. And while doing that, that was really hands-on to learn these skills, change perspective, thinking about what people think, finding solutions even in very difficult situations. So basically that's how we worked every day. So you have to be ready, if you do these kind of training, you have to be ready for surprises and to react very spontaneous to different situations. And maybe some more words from your side, how we...
Yeah, so in essence what we feel is it's possible to implement peer mediation in refugee camps, but it has not to be just mediation training. Then there has to be a dialogue among the trainees, if they represent different ethnic or different political groups, in order to prepare them to be able to work in teams and be role models for the conflict parties.
Yeah. And if you don't solve the conflicts raising up in the group, in the mediation group, then it's for nothing. You know, it would be theoretically, and I think they would not adopt it. So you have to just adjust on conflicts which are actually coming up in the group.
So, and this type of dialogue that we developed for this, where people would meet in small groups and start with sharing their experiences and individual stories and horrible stories of what happened to them in the war or in violent conflicts. Starting by this and then coming to a point where they would feel like, okay, but now what should we do? Can we really work together in order to help others to transform the communities? We call it from shared narratives to joint responsibility, in short, SHARE. We applied it not only in refugee camps. This is, for example, a project in Nepal where former Maoist combatants have to be reintegrated in the society, and they do the same with people from the communities where they recently settled. They have founded their own organizations, and they do it. Now they continue doing it. Similarly, in Egypt, was it at the end of 2012, before the current President al-Sisi took over, when people were still a bit more hopeful on what would happen. We used this sort of dialogue for female politicians representing more Islamic and secular factions of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was more about how to how to overcome. Sorry, I have to drink water. How to overcome, even if you are from very different political parties and from very, very different religious backgrounds as well. How to maybe work together as politicians. How to find joint issues and how to maybe work together as women. And these were politicians who ran for parliament and tried to be successful, which was, of course, this program has stopped now because and now at the current moment there's no chance to help them. Okay, we forgot this. Thank you for your attention thing.
It's not a PowerPoint, it's just pictures. That was what we wanted to tell you about different examples of mediation in the refugee crisis and how it can be used. We are looking forward to your questions and comments. I don't know, do you moderate it usually, or do we just go question, answer, right? Yeah.
I didn't either hear or understand something that you said, and I think it was the basic two goals of either the overall program of this group, but the first one was to empower, and the second one was what I missed. So to empower, and what was the other goal?
It was empowerment,
Yeah,
working on self-esteem,
right.
working on trauma. I would not say healing trauma, but very deliberately I say working on trauma. So step by step. And peer mediation.
And what?
Peer mediation, so in the sense of that they can mediate amongst their own people.
And the original aim was to implement peer mediation in order to improve the situation in the camps or the refugee centers. But then it turned out, okay, we cannot implement peer mediation without having a dialogue, a deep dialogue among those people who are involved, which then, as a side effect, in a sense, had also a trauma healing or trauma counseling effect.
So it's like weaving one into another.
Yeah.
Question up there. Thank you. Komm mal ein bisschen dichter.
So the objectives of the mediation program or the training is linked to the stay of the refugees in the respective refugee camps. There is no objective that stretches beyond the potential return to their home community.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because we forgot to say that. In the Yugoslavian case, it was that many of these people returned to their homes. So it was crucial that and we started, but then there was no financial source to just power it. That these people would go home and then do some, I don't know, found some mediation centers or something, neighborhood mediation or something in their at home. That was the plan. We couldn't do that at that time, unfortunately. And the other direction, of course, is if people stay in the new land, in the host land, then they can use these skills to better integrate. So it's in both directions. And when we do the certificate program next year, starting with next year, we will include that part more, because we think that a lot of them will stay. A lot of refugees will stay in Germany. So we will include in that program the approach that in the dialogue groups we will not only include refugees, but people who are living around the center in the neighborhood, so that these tandems who can mediate them, they will sustain on people who already are Germans or stay a long time in German, and the refugees, so that it has an outreach to the neighborhood. That's the idea. And this time I think it will happen.
And the German Ministry for Development Cooperation is just trying to start a big program where they will invest millions in order to, well, just provide vocational training and skills, which could also be mediation and negotiation skills, that would later, when refugees return to their countries of origin, be beneficial for those countries. It's just difficult to implement it because you don't know when people will go back, you don't know where they will go back, and you cannot just train them in Germany or wherever they are, and then individually they are supposed to use it. They need some support structures then at the places where they return, and I think nobody at the moment has an idea of how to do it. Yeah. I don't know who has...
1, 2, 3.
So in addition of teaching negotiation and mediation to the refugees, did you have a type of agenda of the problems that they had and try to negotiate or mediate the problems that they had as I don't know, like trying to figure out which were the biggest problems in some of the refugee camps and then work it out with them rather than just training them to how to negotiate or mediate?
It's part of the training. I mean, when we speak of training, we never mean that we go through a certain curriculum and have a fixed row of exercises, but to look for the needs that they have and to use those conflicts that are actually going on as sample cases for whatever sort of exercises. So it's part of the training.
So, for example, if you see the Kenyan situation, which you showed before, it was more how to deal with a host community, maybe these kind of conflicts. In the Yugoslavian case, it was more how to deal amongst the refugees and how to deal with the social workers who were working there. So, and with these Egypt women, it was absolutely only about Egypt's situation and how to deal with that situation, you know, and how to analyze this situation as well. It was not only, in this training, it was not only mediation, but to analyze the situation from different perspectives. So, but, you know, it's not important from which side you come. You have to think, you are very right. You have to think about what are the problems, the current problems of the people, how to include different perspectives with inviting different participants. So the concept is to have a very diverse group. And then from this point on, you start to develop mediation.
But the sad news, by the way, is that if it turns out that there are certain conflicts that, I don't know, could be solved through other means than mediation. For example, in the Kenyan case, I mentioned the lack of firewood. Then the international agencies, they would have their project logic, and it says like you have to implement mediation. And if you find out it makes more sense to provide more firewood, you have a problem in doing so because they know that's beyond our mandate. Yeah.
Okay, there was this, yes.
First, thank you guys for the valuable work that you guys do in kind of shining a beacon of light during people's dark times and for sharing that with us. I wanted to know, given that there are almost 60 million refugees and IDPs in the world, and this problem of conflict with the host communities, especially during times of resource scarcity, is very pervasive. What do you think you could teach us from your experience with the Kakuma refugee camp and the INGOs that can be replicated in other areas where we're seeing these same kind of problems?
Maybe coming also back to the next question, to be flexible in what you plan, because mediation is not always the correct response. To also include yourself as a donor agency, as a conflict actor, meaning reflecting your own role. This might have a way bigger effect than implementing prefixed programs. I don't know whether that goes as an answer. Yeah. So to be flexible, how to implement the programs and to try to really take the actual needs seriously, and not just come with another new idea and new projects.
And that is very often it's a lack of development policy, you know, because they have their idea. Okay, now you implement mediation for 1,000 people, you know, but they never ask whether it's helpful or not. So yeah, we are struggling with that very often.
Yeah.
What's your question?
Just thinking about the needs of these different situations, different locations and countries and backgrounds. But do you see any common issues, for example, regarding, probably it's not your field, but regarding housing, food, water issues that are common on different refugee camps? That are like the main issues. So, well, I'm thinking more about those because the mediation is your.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Well, the scarcity of resources.
Okay.
It's a pervasive problem. We have it like regarding the firewood in Kenya, regarding just the space for people, which is also a source of conflict in the refugee centers in Germany, of course. And it's in a way it is cynical if you come with programs to implement mediation in order for them to solve the conflicts better, rather than giving them more space. So we sometimes, it gives us a hard time thinking, is it just a fig leaf things that we are supposed to do here? Or is it something that can really help? So that's common, the scarcity of resource.
Another thing is that in most refugee centers, people are not allowed to work. So they are ripped of every skills and resources they have to provide. So they lose the whole identity. Coming as doctors, coming as teachers, coming as artists, coming as taxi drivers, I don't know what, different people, but then coming to the new country is like being a newborn, but you are not a newborn, you know. So nobody asks, what can you give? Nobody asks, who are you? Nobody asks, what would you like to do? And people are not allowed to work very often. So that sucks.
Two more points. Second, that host communities tend to be neglected, or at least poor communication. The Kenya example, for example, they complain very much that the international agencies, they come and they bring their staff from Nairobi, the capital, rather than hiring local staff. Actually, it's not true. I mean, they do a lot of efforts to hire local staff, but they communicate it poorly. The Germans, for example, those people who live nearby refugee centers and I don't know, do those sort of attacks and complain about it, there's one point where they are right, they get informed very late. So the public administrations could do way better by having more participatory processes where they would early inform the people or try to consult with them. Yeah. And the third thing is, and then here we come back to mediation, that given the scarcity of resources, when we have refugees from different ethnic or political groups who fight with each other, they have a tendency to continue the fight in the refugee camps rather than like working together in order to use the existing resources efficiently. And here we often come to the point then where we feel like, okay, but so then it makes sense to have mediation in order to empower them to use those resources better and to also like work together in order to get more resources. I think there was the gentleman over here in the first row, and then we have more questions over there. 1, 2, 3 there.
I guess it's a follow-up question on to the previous commentators here. First, just to say that your work is very impressive. I'm quite impressed by what you've achieved. But I think that it's limited twice. First, because it's limited to the local versus local communities versus the refugees, and secondly because it requires the personal attendance of either you or a trainee, a mediator. So the numbers are kind of modest in terms of the impact that you can bring. So my question to you is actually twofold. First, did you think about ways to amplify your work and the impact that you have? And what would these be in light of these figures of more than 60 million worldwide refugees and displaced persons? And number two, do you have any kind of lobbying processes or activities vis-a-vis the government, and not the local governments, but the central government in your country?
Okay.
For the work you're doing?
You want to start?
Yes. Lobbying, yes, we do. We try to network with other organizations who have similar approaches, and there are lots of volunteer groups now doing work with refugees in Germany. It's a real movement. They all try to lobby, but well, it's still difficult due to the funding framework that they give you. Number two, to amplify the effects of that work. I mean, one thing is obvious, having the 60 millions in mind. And this is something that helps to mitigate the consequences. It doesn't address the root causes. In order to address the root causes, we need to, well, continue to work in peace mediation on a political level, plus better development work. But that's a broad topic, and it's not a new one. I mean, even in Germany now, they discuss about addressing the root causes of the refugee crisis, but it's a very old story. The root causes are not new. We know all this since 40, 50 years, and we know all the criticism about the inefficiency of development cooperation since decades, but it's still not changing. They just come up with new sophisticated programs about doing some work with the refugees rather than really addressing the root causes. So that's one limitation. The second limitation, again, refers to the funding frameworks. As you mentioned, in the first phase, it requires our attendance or the attendance of some trained mediators. It's supposed to...
Let's look to them again.
They are now in the third stage, so to speak, where they have founded their own local organizations to provide this sort of dialogue and mediation on their own.
So just to give you a number, we started that project in 2012, I guess?
Yes.
Right? So now we have 4 in Nepal, which is a small country, of course, but we have in Nepal 4 of these share centers for dialogue and facilitation, they call themselves, share center for dialogue and mediation. And they reached out to more than 1,000 people now, which is a small number, of course, but you know, a bit more than 1,000 people, and did some 250 everyday raising mediations.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I was aiming at using some more advanced models of communication and reaching out, you know, social networking, etc., video conferences, stuff like that. You know?
Yeah. You too. So
still on small numbers, you know.
What needs to happen is that people who have experienced this sort of dialogue and maybe it made a difference for them, they need to be encouraged to share this using media arts, writing poems about it, theater plays, and so on and so forth. We try to encourage them to do that. That's true, in order to reach a broader public. Again, we have the problem that oftentimes when these type of projects are working and the people are trained and they can do it themselves, the funding stops. Yeah.
Even if they don't need much funding, but it stops totally.
Yeah. Okay. I think we had a gentleman over there, and then you will hear.
Yeah, and you as well.
Yeah.
I see you.
I was wondering if you could talk about how you came to work with these particular camps, and what, if anything, you did at the outset of the mediation and training to build acceptance of you as people, acceptance of mediation, acceptance of the process, and so forth.
Yeah. So, you, me.
Very, very different situations in every different. So to this Yugoslavian thing, Nobody planned a mediation program at that time. I was invited to do something because they were just fighting every day. So, and I was very young, and they said, okay, can you just come do something? And I was so naive to say, yeah, okay, will. So I started, that was the approach then. And they came, the people, so the trainees, they didn't come because they wanted to learn mediation, but they came because they said later, we come to defend our own people. But the precondition was that we will work in, and I say, yes, you can. I can promise you that you will better defend your own people, you know, but the precondition was to work in mixed groups. So that was one way. But in other situations...
Sometimes we are just asked, because we are hired as consultants. So we seldom have the opportunity to choose where we would like to work, because we feel this would make most sense. But we also have to wait when people ask us. Regarding the acceptance of mediation, it's a very important point. What we always try to do is develop hybrid models of mediation that build on the existing traditional mediation structures in the respective country. Most mediation trainings, we start with a little picture how mediation went around the world, because as you all know, the modern so-called mediation movement in the United States started off with people looking in Asia, South America, Africa, how traditionally people solve conflicts. And then they modified it, and now we facilitative mediators come back to those countries and again modify the approach and develop something. For example, in Ethiopia, we agreed then with the group of trainees to label it as a facilitative wise elder mediation, which is supposedly a contradiction in itself, but we're trying to bring the traditional wise elder mediation together with some elements from the facilitative style of mediation.
And we modify it, of course. They modified. We modified together with the group, because it's no use in impose an idea of mediation.
So we would spend half a day or a day at the beginning to listen to how do you solve conflicts.
That was your turn, I think.
There is another question.
Okay, thank you.
My question is about your background and training, because I'm thinking you must have been trained in anthropology and systems thinking and psychology, or you're just amazing people. Superwoman and Superman t-shirts. I mean, this is incredible work, and I'm curious about sort of what, in addition to Gabi's wonderful training, what other kinds of training, or did it spring from the head of Zeus?
Okay.
And how can we replicate that with other people? Because it's really a stunning.
Yeah. So she's a psychotherapist.
Oh, of course.
Didn't you recognize?
By training. The anthropology we do not have, but we have spent a lot of time thinking about intercultural aspects in mediation and negotiation. And the systems theory, you are right. We learned it, by the way, in relation to peace processes and how systemic thinking can help you to develop strategies that are more effective. That we learned from the collaborative learning project CDA in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We just met them yesterday, so very nearby. But we would emphasize that we do not think you need to be a psychotherapist.
He is a chemist. What is the name for it?
Yes, my original studies were food chemistry.
Yeah.
See? Yeah.
Systemic. Systemic in how things work together.
And we are serious in that. It's not supposed to replace professional trauma counseling, and this is not an option for the 60 millions. That everyone gets a professionally trained psychotherapist. So we have to find other ways, and that are more easy to implement for people who just received a short training, and we think that's possible. Yeah.
And maybe you don't need any super skill. It's just to listen to people, and that's what you know, I guess. To listen to the people and find out what would be helpful for them, and then to respect what they will develop. So we learned very, very much in working with these people.
I think maybe first here. Yeah.
I wonder how, if you might speak a little bit on a personal level of how you process then the stories that you hear, because I can imagine that it's not an easy thing to hear these stories and to be walking with people who have been through such trauma. And I just wonder how you cope with that.
You start.
I learned it. So when I think back to this 20 years ago, is it almost 20 years ago, how I worked with that refugees, very often I cried in the evenings because I couldn't stand that stories. But I think you can, and now when we train people, we have special methods, very easy ones, like to think about a bubble around yourself, to just be with the people, but at the same time, don't let them reach your own. No, it's difficult to say. Just how to defend yourself, but being with the people at the same time, and it's not too difficult to learn. If you just in the training coming up, for example, we will do that. We will just do exercises on it because it is difficult. And of course, we try to work in tandems with other people so that you can talk about it, so you can supervise each other's. It's very important to have people to talk with who are outside the whole thing, or you have to share these things.
And by the way, Ljubjana, she cannot see cruel scenes in the TV. She switches off or changes.
I cannot. Yeah.
But it's something different. But she can listen to those stories for hours.
On the torture, so to victims of torture, I can listen to them because I have the possibility to talk to them. But I cannot. It helps. Yeah. I see many of you have these experiences as well. Yeah.
And for me.
What about for you?
Yeah, I have something. I don't know where I have it from. I have an image that is like that pain, grief, and this sort of thing are feelings that are somewhere. There's a big reservoir somewhere in the sky, I don't know. And once I feel pain, grief, whatsoever, I'm connected to that, which is good. And I need to be, when I listen and I'm supposed to be compassionate, I need that. But it can also be switched off. It's not really my pain. It's just the connection to that reservoir. That's just a stupid image that helps me to do it. Yeah. We had, I think, one more question here, and then we should. Sorry?
More in the way of a comment.
Yeah.
I'm a therapist who's also been doing work similar to this with a colleague in conflict resolution who's a mediator. And I would really disagree that we can't find a way to do trauma healing. I'm a specialist in trauma work at the large scale. I think it's totally essential. And I think what's needed, first of all, is a lot of education about what trauma is.
Yes.
And it's really not understood, and to differentiate to begin with PTSD from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would disagree that a therapist maybe isn't essential in a team, but multidisciplinary teams, I think, are really good for this kind of work.
True.
And therapists their work is essential, but in my view, what's needed so much is to move from the addressing things at the personal level, which I don't hear you primarily doing, but figuring out a way to move from the group to the really collective level. And I think that is going to be possible, but I think that's the goal I would like to see there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's a misunderstanding. We're just saying that to have the one-to-one settings that we are used to in psychotherapy and the length of this, this is just not an option for the 60 million due to resource
No,
problems.
and I think groups
But-
may be
but-
more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Than individual
exactly.
No,
yeah.
but that's
so
we
we tried.
exactly
We need to
agree
make
to
use
that.
of this.
Yeah.
We totally agree in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.